Nike's iconic shoes were created at a time when everyone adored Adidas and New Balance. It's hard to imagine how a young company could compete with such giants and today become the largest sports shoe manufacturer in the world. The most amazing thing is that the founder was an ordinary guy, just like all of us. He didn't have extraordinary finances or connections, but he had perseverance and a dream, just the dream he followed all along. It all started in September 1962 when Philip Knight jumped in a car to chase his crazy dream. What he called a crazy dream was the idea he came up with at Stanford Graduate School of Business, that Japanese sneakers could succeed in the US, just like Japanese cameras did back in the 60s. He was born on 24th of February 1938 in Portland, Oregon, in the family of William Knight, lawyer, politician, newspaper publisher. His mother, Lotta Hatfield Knight, and two sisters. Knight was running since he was a child because one day when he was turned down by his school's baseball team, his mother told him that he could run, and he could run very fast. Running was something he could do, and there would be no one to turn him down. And he ran throughout his whole life while chilling, thinking, and making very important decisions. At the age of 24, he graduated with an MBA degree and served in the army, but couldn't yet understand what to do next and where does he belong. Many of us have felt the same way, right? The crazy dream kept coming to him while he was running every day. By that time, it only strengthened and matured in his head. Japanese sneakers' success in the US seemed so obvious. So he asked his father to support him in chasing his dream and desire to see beautiful places he read all about. And his father supported him financially and emotionally, saying that you have got to do it. Knight packed his bag and traveled around the world. He came back home with all those experiences and knowledge he had received. In Japan, Knight dropped a visit to Onitsuka Company, now known as Asics, and asked them to become Onitsuka's brand Tiger distributor in the US. It was his first business meeting for Knight. He even had to quickly make up a name for his not yet existed company to impress Japanese managers. This is how Blue Ribbon Sports was born. They agreed on sending him samples for $50. $50 that Knight didn't have, so he asked his father to back him up on this. While he was desperately waiting for his samples from Japan, which arrived only a year later after his meeting, Knight worked as an accountant in Portland. Knight sent a sample to his running coach at the University of Oregon, Bill Bowerman, whose shoes approval would mean a lot to Knight. Bowerman was known for experimenting with running shoes throughout his career and testing them on his team because he was constantly looking for the best version of shoes that could boost up his team members. He used to tear up sneakers by parts and put them all together, adjusted and better. So Bowerman didn't only place an order with Knight, but offered to be a partner in Knight's enterprise. They agreed that 51% of the company would belong to Knight, and he'll be responsible for all the operations, while Bowerman will share the costs for 39% of the Blue Ribbon Sports. Together, they placed a $1,000 worth order for 300 pairs of Tiger shoes. Knight again asked his dad for money, and although his dad was very skeptical about this idea and wanted his son to have a stable accountant job instead, he gave that money because Knight's mother demonstratively bought the first pair of Limbab shoes for $7. So it all started. In April 1964, Knight was driving around the Pacific Northwest on his Plymouth Valiant, which he bought on his accountant's salary, and attended all competitions presenting Tiger running shoes to athletes and coaches because a couple of local shoe stores turned Knight down earlier. He sold all 300 pairs for $7 each by July because people he approaches loved them for the quality and the price, and Knight placed another order for 900 pairs. This time, his father didn't give him money, but becomes a guarantor and sent Knight to his bank manager to ask for credit. In 1965, he hired Jeff Johnson, that earlier worked selling Adidas shoes. Knight knew Johnson from college and hired him to represent Blue Ribbon Sports in California. Johnson was the first full-time employee with a salary of $400, which was big money for Knight at that time. In just 10 months, Johnson sold 3,250 pairs of shoes, a number Knight couldn't imagine himself. Funny fact, Johnson was very enthusiastic. He was writing to Knight almost every day, stating the number of sales, telling him about his thoughts and worries, and asking Knight for motivation. It was a little too much for Knight to handle, because at that time, he was not just working on his Blue Ribbon company, but also worked as a credit public accountant for Pricewaterhouse, because he needed stable money for his life and to support his own company from time to time. In 2 years, sales continued to grow. yet it couldn't afford Knight's full-time concentration, so he changed his accountant job to an accounting professor at Portland State University because this way he had more time for his enterprise and could afford his living costs. This is where he met Penny Parks. She was simply the brightest and smartest woman he had ever known. Knight asked her to become an accountant for Blue Ribbon Sports, and a little later, they got married. By 1971, Blue Ribbon sales were growing very fast, $1.3 million that year. Throughout this time, Bowerman was sending Knight new people to hire, along with recommendations on shoe adjustments. He was constantly working on its improvement. Onitsuka was adopting his ideas and came up with far better running shoes than those existing in the market. Everything looked pretty well, but Knight was always dealing with problems such as delays in shipping from Japan, worrying bank managers, and lack of capital in the company because everything it received from sales was immediately placed in the next orders. Knight simply didn't have spare money to spend on business lunches with his team, so he borrowed money from his employees to cover those costs. On top of that, National Bank decided to stop working with Blue Ribbon because it could no longer stand the company's credit line with no capital of its own, and Knight had to switch to Bank of California because others refused to work with him. Along with this problem, Knight's friend that was also working and kind of spying on Onitsuka for Knight warned him that his only manufacturing partner was looking for other distributors in the US. This is why Blue Ribbon Sports started to look for other factories to produce Bowerman's running shoe models, so the company didn't have to fully rely on Onitsuka. Knight agreed to work with a factory in the center of Mexico called Canada. Interesting choice of name, right? Now, Blue Ribbons had to come up with his own brand and logo for it. Everyone was involved in brainstorming, and it was Johnson that suggested Nike for their brand because this word came to him in a dream at night. It might be a surprise to you, but no one loved the name at first, and Knight decided on it only because there was no more time. The logo we all know today was drawn by Carolyn Davidson for $35. She drew the swoosh as a symbol for the movement, the only word that Knight told her when asked for the logo because he simply didn't know what he wanted. Although the samples Knight received later were good, the actual shoes the company received later for the shoe exhibition were disappointing. Yet the team sold them all because buyers trusted Blue Ribbon Sports. They believed that if these guys say that their product is the best, then it must be the best, simply because Blue Ribbon had never lied to them before. What's more is that thanks to this Blue Ribbon's reputation of being honest, the company won a lawsuit against Onitsuka in 1971. You remember that Onitsuka was looking for other distributors despite their agreement with Knight. Well, the company was pretty aggressive once it found out about Nike and its production and filed a lawsuit in Japan. Whereas the same thing did Knight in the US and went out of this all as a winner because Nike was not a copy of Tiger running shoes, but the product of Bowerman's experiments. In 1974, Blue Ribbon Sport had its own factory in Exeter, New Hampshire. Knight was perfectly managing his workforce, moving people around when needed because of their abilities and his belief in their potential. Here's how Johnson from sales became responsible for the whole factory in Exeter. The company aimed to $8 million in sales in 1974, whereas it achieved $4.8 million the previous year. Nike was doubling every year. This is unbelievable. Yet, the Bank of California decided to terminate their partnership because for the bank, the company's operations looked suspicious. Blue Ribbons was making tremendous sales, but had no capital of its own because every penny was used to pay its bank credits, which were taken for new orders and production. This time, Knight turned to Nisho Awai, the Japanese trading company that was giving loans to Knight for quite a while already. But this time, Knight asked them to cover his debt of $1 million to the Bank of California. Nisho Awai backed him up on this and supported him along the way because they could see the potential in Knight's company. Many people now associate Nike with its product line, Air. Well, Bowerman was not the only one to come up with new technological advantages. Former aerospace engineer Franklin Rudy came up with a seemingly crazy idea. His theory was that a tiny bags of air in the soles of athletic shoes could soften the impact. In 1977, after facing 23 rejections, Frank presented the idea to Knight. Knight took a prototype for a test run and was amazed by its smooth ride. But he agreed to work with Rudy for sure once he heard that Adidas rejected him earlier. The first launch in 1978 was called Tailwind, and this model consisted of 12 technological innovations. Incredible sales were boosted by marketing campaigns, and brand new shoes were very popular. But later, customers complained that shoes literally explode and fall apart. Knight realized that this was a mistake. To merge 12 innovations at once was simply too much, and the company worked on them more. Air went through many adjustments and successful releases, and eventually became more than just running shoes. This made Nike a company that changed the culture of sports shoe wearing, making them for everyday life. By 1977, Nike was producing its footwear in Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Puerto Rico, and Exeter, and yet had delays placing its product on shelves because the demand kept rising. When Knight received a perfect copy of Nike sneakers made by another Korean manufacturer, he sent a director a frightening letter urging him to stop copying his brand, but also asked him if the factory was interested in a partnership. This way, Knight didn't only get rid of a competitor, but also became independent from Japanese factories. A year later, Nike became the first American company in 25 years to operate in China. Also, in the 1980s, Nike decided to diversify Nike and start producing its clothing. Of course, the company considered that Adidas was making far more sales on clothing than shoes. And if Nike wanted to become a public company, it had to be a little more than just a shoe manufacturer. In September, they filed to create 20 million shares of Class A stock and 30 million of Class B. 30 million shares would be held in reserve, and 2 million Class B shares are sold to the public. In December 1980, Nike became a public company, the same week as Apple. Knight was convinced that his shares are not worth an apple's and cannot be any cheaper, so the company offered its shares at $22 each. Knight kept 46% of the company, and it was worth $178 million. Of course, the company was always advertising its shoes by asking, or sometimes begging, various athletes to wear its shoes. Nike's first professional athlete endorser was the Romanian tennis player Elena Stase. The contract was worth $10,000 in 1972. The first track endorser was distance runner Steve Prefontaine. Baron was coaching Pre, who from 1973 to 1975 set American records at every distance. Blue Ribbons actually hired Pre in 1973 because that time Olympic athletes were forbidden to take money from any companies as brand ambassadors. So to prevent Pre from spending his time working instead of training, Blue Ribbons paid $5,000 a year, and it was the best investment at that time. Pre was very popular. He was surrounded by people everywhere he went and was always wearing Nike shoes. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 24 in an automobile crash near his residence. Today, the Steve Prefontaine building is named in his honor at Nike's corporate headquarters. Another outstanding signing that affected Nike's success was Michael Jordan in 1984. Michael Jordan had never even worn a Nike shoe at that time, but was convinced by his parents to take the deal over Adidas. Nike designed the first Air Jordans in red, black, and white, and was willing to pay NBA fines of $5,000 every time Michael Jordan wore them. Because NBA had a rule that players have to wear only white-colored shoes. Nike predicted $3 million in sales of the Air Jordan in the first 4 years of the deal, but it sold $126 million in the first year alone. "Just do it" is the slogan we all know today by heart. It was created in 1987 by Dan Whedon, founder of the agency Whedon Kennedy, because he wanted to unite the advertising campaign for Nike. This phrase was inspired by convicted murderer Gary Gilmore, who said "let's do it" to the firing squad before his acquisition. Wow, right? Inspiration is the thing you cannot control. Nike questioned whether it was truly needed and then said that they could drop it next time, but the response from audiences was definitive. The line resonated deeply in the athletic community, and just as deeply with people who had little or no connection to sports. Nike became a mainstream shoe. Having previously been known mainly as a track running shoe, slipped in a popular culture as the edgy must-have sneaker, and is now one of the most recognized brands on the planet. Today, Nike has 1,046 retail stores throughout the entire world, and the company is worth $194.77 billion. Philip Knight used to think that he was very bad at sales because he couldn't sell encyclopedias when he was 24 years old, but when it came to running shoes, he was simply the best. Today, he is the 27th richest person in the world with a net worth of $47.5 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaire Index. This story is an example that one skill is not just enough. The passion is needed. Philip Knight once said to himself, and thus advised to all of us, "Let everyone call your idea crazy. Just keep doing. Don't stop. Don't even think about stopping until you get there. And don't give much thought to where there is. Whatever comes, just don't stop." Keep up learning, guys. Success is just a number of attempts.